thank you for being here, folks. I'm really glad that you joined us, and happy Pride Month to everybody. We wanted to make sure we every year in June we try to do something that focuses on the LGBTQIA plus population. We have other programs throughout the year that also address this topic, but June is a special month, and I'm glad we got it in before the end of the month. By the way, my name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. I want to thank the Chester County Department of Drug and Alcohol Services. They are supporting this program, so thank you so much to them. They're a community partner for a few years now, and really grateful to them for their ongoing support. You can follow up on this program on our website. We always have a page that provides supportive resources. That's where you'll find the recording of this program, but we also have a number of other programs recorded there and a lot of resources listed. So anything that our presenters tonight shared that I don't already have on that page, I'll be sure to add that so that you can take a deeper dive into these topics that are being addressed. And that's conversation.zone/LGBT. And once I stop sharing, I'll start putting some of these links in the chat for you. We have a YouTube channel that has more than 160 programs recorded on it. So once we, could hit, we moved over to Zoom. And by the way, we still have loads and loads of programs that happen in person. We had 75 community events this past year, but half of them roughly were on Zoom. And so we recorded them, and there they are. So you can go onto that section and learn more about a lot of different topics. Our focus is substance use and all the related behavioral health challenges that might be accompanying substance use. And by the way, if you're not muted, I'd appreciate if you wouldn't mind muting until you happen to be ready to speak later. I want to let you know that we have support group meetings for parents, guardians, or grandparents who have been impacted by a loved one's substance use. I am one of those folks. I actually have a dad in recovery, and I also have a 35-year-old son who has 14 years in recovery, and that's really what prompted me to kind of launch this organization back in 2011. So we need each other. We family members really need to learn how to work on our boundaries and let go of some of the fear that's been crippling us for some time. So I hope that you'll consider joining some of these meetings. They're similar to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon, if you're familiar with those, but they are not 12-step. We support all pathways, including 12-step programs. But we parents like to have crosstalk. And so this is an opportunity to have some kind of group conversations about our challenges. So you can find details about our 21 meetings that take place every week. About half of them are on Zoom and we're in person. So you can click on these buttons on this page and get details about whether it's a Zoom meeting, there's the link, or if it's in person, details about the address. We also, by the way, no charge to attend any of those meetings. And that also goes for this, which is our family recovery course, totally free to attend. This is a 3-part course that is led by peers like myself who are instructors that have been trained. And we cap this course at 12 participants. But again, these are parents, guardians, and grandparents impacted by a loved one's substance use. This is not a prevention program. This is, we are in the soup. We are dealing with this. Our child at any age, adolescent through well into their adult years, is currently or has previously struggled with substance use. And our challenges as family members with codependency and things like that can last well into their recovery even. And so, and as well as some trauma that we might have experienced. So that's what we dive into for that course. So I hope that you'll consider the family recovery course, partnership meetings as opportunities to just connect and find support. So I am very excited to introduce our 2 presenters. First, you're going to hear from Hope, and then you'll hear from Don Altemus. So Hope McMahan is a prevention specialist with Prevention Education Solutions and is a graduate student. Now, Hope, did you just graduate? Have you just graduated from Bryn Mawr?
Yes, I just graduated like a month ago.
Congratulations. I couldn't tell in the bio because it said you're a student, but I'm like, I think you're a graduate. So yay. Thank you for everything that you're doing with Prevention Education Solutions. You guys are an amazing organization. So they were a graduate student at the Graduate School of Social Work at Bryn Mawr College, now an MSW. Their primary research focus revolves around the development, implementation, and assessment of non-morally based substance use prevention models. Hope is dedicated to examining and redefining conventional approaches to substance use prevention. Hope's commitment to substance use prevention research extends into their personal life as they are someone in long-term healthy recovery. This personal experience not only fuels their passion for the subject, but also adds a valuable perspective to their work with students in the classroom. And I'll go ahead and tell you about Don as well. You'll hear from him, and after you hear from Hope. Don has 15 years of experience in supporting people in recovery. He presents internationally to advance concepts in peer support, community inclusion, and self-direction. Don currently provides counseling for children, adolescents, and adults at Tranquil Solutions Counseling Center and North Coventry Elementary School. He is an adjunct professor for Villanova University and Reading Area Community College. Don provides consulting, supervision, and recovery coaching services with Recovery Education and Consulting, LLC. And I hope you'll both feel free to share anything that I left out or that you think is important to who you are. So thank you so much for being here, Hope and Don. Go ahead, Hope.
All right, thank you so much, Kim. I also want to give you a shout out. I have been able to go to a few of be a part of the conversations, and also just kind of get to know Kim in a really great work way. And you also do wonderful work, and I'm really honored to be here. So I will just start off and say I'm a very dramatic person. So the way I tell my story is a little dramatic. And I have been doing this work for about 3 years now, and I've been traveling the world doing it, but I also do work within Montgomery County with the colleges doing harm reduction. But we're going to start, usually I'm in person doing these talks, and I always like to just point out, so I'm 6'2", but we start when Hope was really little. So the story starts when I was growing up. I grew up in Appalachia in Western North Carolina. And when I was about 5 years old, I was diagnosed with autism. And that kind of changed my public school experience. Now, if you guys have ever done any research on public schools in North Carolina, they're not so great. And during the time that I was growing up, there were not great funding for the western part of the state. So how they started to do this to try to get funding into the poor part of the state is they were like, let's raise test scores. I was one of those chosen kids who was put into this streamlined, advanced part of public school, and I traveled my entire public school career with the same 20 kids. When I was in middle school, I started taking a bus to the high school and began taking high school classes. And middle school is already hard enough, but on top of that, I also came out when I was 13 years old. I was the only person that I knew of who had come out in my area. I had no one older than me that I knew. I just knew that this was who I was. And at this time in my life, my family, they were okay with it. We get through my entire high school career. I end up graduating with a 4.99 GPA weighted. I had a D1 scholarship offered to me for basketball. Again, I'm really tall. It's really not as dramatic over Zoom, but it really is you can tell that, maybe was an athlete. So I had the pick of the litter for all of my colleges. I was very fortunate to get into multiple Ivy Leagues and other schools. And there was something that I kind of started noticing when I was visiting schools is I really wanted to fit in wherever I wanted to go to college. Because growing up in Appalachia, I looked pretty much like this. I dressed very different than everyone else. And the only way I fit in high school was I made really good grades and I was a star athlete. But nothing else really made sense. And I didn't have anyone who looked like me or who thought like me. So I wanted to go to college to be able to experience that. I found a small little school in Montgomery County, a historically women's college, Bryn Mawr College. I visited there and I fell in love. They then offered me a full academic scholarship. And as a person who grew up in poverty, they were offering me around $60,000 a year to go to school. I decided to go there. And when I was 17 years old, we packed up the car and my family drove me 11 hours and dropped me off for my first year of college. I still did not use any type of substance until later on. And this is where where I say I'm dramatic. I have to build a little bit just to get you guys to understand. I also, at the time, where I grew up, we didn't talk about our feelings. I had been in therapy for other reasons, but it really was, you don't go to therapy. That's for people who were not okay. And I always thought I was okay. And I also had all this pressure from going through what I call the guinea pig program to bring funding into Western North Carolina for testing, is that I also had a lot of potential to live up to. As a first generation college student who had all of this money given to them, I also thought that I had to be perfect when I was at college. So my first semester, I decided to apply for a joint program with the University of Pennsylvania through Bryn Mawr because I decided I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to help people. And I could get my bachelor's degree and my master's degree in 5 years instead of the traditional 6. So I got put into this prestigious, I got accepted into this program. I joined the basketball team. Now, Bryn Mawr College is not known for its athletics, and I was walking on there from a D1 scholarship. So they were very excited for me to come play for them. They had not won a game in about 4 years. And I started taking 5 courses. I got special permission to take an additional course at Bryn Mawr. So we get through my entire first semester of college. I'm on the basketball team. I joined the Self-Governance Association. I'm taking 5 courses, including taking a train into Center City or to Pennsylvania every single day. And I don't know if anyone grew up in a rural place, but when you first learn how to use public transportation and you're like kind of an adult, it's a little scary for the first few times. Like I'm still scared of public transportation because I'm like, what do you mean you just don't drive everywhere? So I'm adjusting. All these transitions are all new. And I don't drink the entire first semester. I make the dean's list. We go into a winter tournament for basketball and we win our first game. I'm starting on the basketball team. We're going to this tournament. We make it to the finals, but we don't actually end up winning. We lose by about 5 points. But at the end, they give out all these awards and I get the MVP. So I'm going to travel home. I just won the MVP trophy for this basketball tournament that I get to show off to my family. And I know that they're going to be very proud. And then I also learned that I made the dean's list because I made all A's in all of my classes. So it's a big deal. Like I get to go home. I'm really excited to see my family again. I'm really excited to see my dog. It's all great. I get to spend a great time and a great holidays with them. I go back to school about 2 weeks before everyone else to go back to, start playing basketball again. And I re-tear my ACL and my meniscus for the second time. So I had torn it in high school. And I'm like, all right, I came back pretty quickly in high school. Maybe I can do it again. I end up traveling back home and my surgeon tells me that I'm no longer going to be able to play basketball ever again. And this was a big blow to me because basketball was not just like something that I did for fun. It was how I managed my emotions. It was also how I felt that I was like, I actually could give something to people to feel like I could fit in. Because where I grew up, the only way that I fit in was because I was the basketball player. I go back to school and I start the spring semester. I'm on crutches. I'm in a giant knee brace. This is also, I believe, when we had snowpocalypse, when all that snow happened. We don't get snow anymore, but that was when that was. And traveling around on campus in crutches was absolutely terrifying. I will say I am very fortunate that this is also still not when I have still not done drugs that were not like prescribed to me. I was prescribed a lot of opioids during this time, and I'm very fortunate that I did not start misusing my opioid pain medication. And I decided I'm going to help coach the basketball team just because I don't think I can give it up yet. I can't ever play again, so I continue with the season. We get through the rest of my freshman year semester, make the dean's list again, and then over the summer, I take a summer job because if I go home, I don't really know what I'm going to do, and I need to make money because there's no way my family can't afford to help with things. So I get a job on campus, and while I'm working, I decide to work at the gym over the summer. I get approached by the rowing coach because it turns out when you're over 6 foot tall, kind of all sports come really naturally to you. And I decided to join the crew team at Bryn Mawr because I learned that it's pretty low impact. We go into my sophomore year, and this is also where you're like, where did you start using drugs? I promise we're getting there. this is where I am still taking 5 courses. I'm traveling into Philly from Bryn Mawr to take this architectural like studio class. And now I am helping coach the basketball team, but I'm also waking up at about 4:30 every single morning for crew practice. We get through my fall semester of my sophomore year, and I'm really starting to feel something that is like off. I don't really have that many friends, which I've always been really like accustomed to. I've always just thought it was because I'm a little bit different than most people, like either from like just like my own neurodivergency, but I also just have never really had the need to have a lot of like friends. But I realize I don't have connection at all. And I used to be able to connect with basketball players because you were forced to spend time with everyone, so you just end up having some type of bond. And that doesn't really work anymore. I also start to get frustrated with the basketball team because, quite honestly, I feel like I need to be there to like help them win. So I end up dropping the basketball team. And then I get approached by some folks, and I start hanging out with them, and they were like on the rugby team, and I learned that the crew team and the rugby team, they always have a lot of fun parties together. And I just had never really been a party person because I was always told, don't do drugs, don't do anything. If you do them, you're going to be a bad person. That was the rhetoric I had. But I also knew that another thing that I learned was by watching TV and movies is people make friends by going to parties. And what is the most iconic thing at a college party is using some type of drug, whether it is alcohol or a cigarette or you like smoking weed. And I was really scared of that. But I also was tired of being alone. So I went to my first college party at 19 years old, and I had my first beer out of a keg in a red Solo cup, and nothing bad happened. I talked to my crush, I danced, I'm pretty sure I sang karaoke. I woke up the next morning and everything was fine. I had been told, like, it like blew my mind because I'd always been told if you do this thing, bad things are going to happen. And it didn't happen. And at a 19-year-old, I was like, well, what's the worst case? I had fun. I started hanging out with people that I met there that night. So I started making it more of a regular thing. We get through my fall semester, I still make the dean's list. I'm not playing basketball, but I'm still on the crew team. And then we get to my spring semester, crew is really starting to pick up. We're starting to have regattas. It's getting more serious. My workload for college is getting more serious as well. I'm having to like really like hang out a lot more on Penn's campus for like, this is like hand drawing buildings and stuff like that. So I had to spend a lot of time in the drafting studios. And this is where I also started thinking that if I smoked weed, that it would make me more creative, because that's what the rhetoric I had heard around that as well. And like, I already learned that, well, if I drink beer, it's not going to like, do anything bad. So might as well try this thing to like help me give me that edge to be better, to be more perfect in a sense. So I started smoking weed. And remember, I told you guys I was like a little terrified of public transportation. Well, so it turns out when you are really high and you take public transportation, it is also even more terrifying, to the point where one time I accidentally took the train one stop too far coming back from UPenn, which puts you at Villanova. And Villanova's campus is very different than Bryn Mawr's campus. I was very confused, just coming from a historically women's college to like a sports team college. It was a little bit of a shock. So I decided from that point on, I'm not ever going to use a substance on the train again. Being responsible. This is my plan. I have it. And I still thought I was being creative with my work. So I still wanted to smoke and go to UPenn and do my drawings. But I didn't want to carry anything on the train. So I stopped going to class. And when you don't go to class in college, you start to fail that class. I ended up getting kicked out of this 4+1 program with UPenn. And I was like, all right, okay, whatever. I can still go and get my master's degree in architecture after I finish my bachelor's. This isn't a big deal. Maybe I just need to like take a break. We get to my junior year in the fall. So I'm only to the crew team and I'm down to 4 classes. My grade point average is still like a 3.9, so I'm still doing really well. And at this point, I'm going out probably around 3 times a night. So usually like a random Thursday, a Friday, and a Saturday night, I go out. We get through my entire junior year, my fall semester, everything goes pretty swell, except I stopped going to my morning classes on Friday morning. So I had to drop another class. Luckily, I was able to use some testing scores from high school to help keep me up. Then we get to January of my junior year in college. Now, it doesn't happen as much anymore, but on the Schuylkill River in January, a lot of times you would get a little bit of ice on the edge. And when you would take the boat out, you'd have to kick the ice out just a little bit, put the boat in, and go. There's this one particular practice that I always remember. It was on a Monday. And I found out that there's a bar that we share, like a town, Bryn Mawr and Villanova share a town. And there's this bar that does like trivia every single Sunday night. And I love trivia because I just have a lot of really good facts. I also learned that it was pretty easy to get people to buy me free drinks too. So I come home from this bar at about 2 a.m. and I have to get up at about 4:30 to get on the van to go to the Schuylkill River. I sleep maybe an hour, not really great. Get up, still intoxicated, go kick off the ice on the Schuylkill, get on the boat, and I immediately vomit off the side of this boat. Now, I don't quit drinking on Sunday nights because I want to go play trivia. Instead, I quit the crew team. I also, because this then kind of just like starts to then spiral out more, I start going out more and more frequently. By the time I get to my senior year in college, I'm writing an undergraduate thesis. I am on track to graduate. I even have grad school and even jobs lined up after my college career. I'm hospitalized 10 times within 7 weeks for alcohol poisoning. And by the time December rolls around, I am given a letter that I am no longer welcome back at this school. I am kicked out of college. My parents drive 11 hours. They pick me up and we drive 11 hours back home. My family didn't really know how to talk to me with this. I remember that I could feel that they were ashamed of me and that they had a lot of guilt. We kind of had a game plan of what like was going on. They didn't really understand that this had to do anything with me being an active addiction. They really just thought that this is just what it is and that maybe our family wasn't cut out to go to college, that we just needed to stay with each other. So I got a job, just doing random things. I was able to get a car. I was promoted at this job in Asheville, North Carolina. And then I go from breaking records for the amount of rebounds you can have in a season and the amount of points you can have in a season to the number of DUIs you can have in 1 week. I was convicted with 2 DUIs within 6 days. I was looking at 2 years in county jail and was able to plea into a drug court. So like a court that is really geared more to rehabilitation than just punishment. I do end up serving some time. I come out with 2 fancy bracelets, one on my right leg to track every single move I make and tells me that I have to be home between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. And another one that's constantly reading my leg to see if I have drank alcohol. It takes me 2 years to complete this court where I was on probation. I couldn't leave the state. It also limited my own ability to get a job. During this time, I was a peer support specialist in the North Carolina area. I was a part of a lot of other organizations helping folks in recovery, and specifically helping those who have been incarcerated. Since then, I took time off, and in 6 years, I did finally go back to college. I did receive my bachelor's degree from Bryn Mawr, and then I applied to social work school because I realized how much of my own recovery story had to do with my own identities. When I look back at my own life and think about what I really needed as that child who had gone to college, was really understanding that a lot of times I didn't feel like I fit in as a kid. And I didn't know how to fit in. But one way I could fit in was when I started to use alcohol and I started to smoke weed. And also it made me feel like I could live up to my potentials because I never learned how to fail either. And that's a big part of this too. I call a lot of these little like points in my story, I call them the facts, which really stands for the F is family history. So my family didn't talk about therapy. We didn't go to therapy. But I also, being from Appalachia, if you know anything about Appalachia, you know that there is a strong, like, there is a lot of stories of addiction in this area. My father is now 2 years sober. He was in active addiction most of my childhood, and I didn't even know it because we didn't talk about it. There are multiple people in my family that were addicts that we just never talked about because of the shame that is brought around this disease. The other part is age of first use. From the ages of 14 to 25, our brains are really primed and you're at higher risk for developing a substance use disorder because of the dopamine. Our brain has yet to form its connection from the pleasure center to the prefrontal cortex. And substances give you a lot of dopamine and you end up training your brain. There's also the cravings, as I was dramatic with my story and talking about what I ended up giving up. All the things that used to give me a lot of dopamine, I stopped getting that amount of dopamine and only was able to get it from actually using drugs. So I gave up, basketball. I gave up my academics. By the way, I still love school. I still want to go back to school. I'm applying again for school. I gave up a lot of friendships during that process. I also stopped talking to my family. I have a very close-knit family. I talk to my mom and my grandma at least once a day. If I don't talk to them within a day period, they text me, "Are you okay?" But I had stopped talking to them at that point. And the biggest thing is surroundings, which is why I feel like this really ties into the topic of this month of with Pride is thinking about how as queer people, even as adults, a lot of times we don't feel like we fit in. And from a family perspective, I was really fortunate. My family is incredibly accepting of every single aspect of me, but that's not the case for everyone. And I think it would have been a lot harder for me if I didn't have that. But I also think they didn't know how to talk to me about it. And that was really a big barrier. I also know I think I finished a little early, but that is kind of all I have. And I really appreciate all of you listening.
Hope that was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I definitely have some follow-up stuff I want to talk to you about, but thank you very, very much. So Don, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thanks so much for being here, Don.
Thank you. I also want to give a shout out to you because I've been to a couple of the be a part of the conversation events, and you do some really great work, Kim, and keep it up. We need programs like this. Hope I met you this evening right before this presentation, and it's kind of wild because there's a lot of places that our stories are very, very similar, and there's also a lot of places that it's extremely different. I also began very young. I don't remember not knowing I was different than a lot of the other people in my life. I honestly don't remember not knowing that. But I spent much of my life not having any words for it because I didn't see any role models like me. I didn't know anybody like me. I had heard of, as a child, one gay woman, Billie Jean King. She played tennis. That's all I knew, right? There was one little family trip where we were on a road trip and we stopped off at P-Town, and my parents had no idea Provincetown was largely a gay town, and so it was very awkward for them and very confusing for me, and that was all the experience I had. When it came to substances, that's a place where my story is very, very different than yours. I both on purpose and accidentally used substances at a very, very young age. There was an instance when I was only 4 years old where I had gone with my aunt and her boyfriend to a baseball game, and it was a keg game, and her boyfriend thought it was cute to teach the little kid how to work the tap. So my aunt finds me with half a glass of beer several times throughout the night. And then I don't remember anything about it, but I know that she had to try to tell, her mom, my grandmother, what was wrong with me when we arrived home. Um, so that was like the first time I used anything, and I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't know anything about it. Um, the first time I intentionally used anything was actually nicotine. It was cigarettes. Um, I grew up in a family of lots of smokers and started just by pilfering smokes off of other people. Swiping one here and there from different family members, and eventually wandering to the store and telling them at the store that my mom had sent me to get a pack of her brand, and purchasing that and going back home with it. And back then stores would sell it if you everybody knew everybody. I grew up in a little town, but it was Malvern. I grew up in a small town, and everybody knew everybody. So as long as I didn't ask for a different brand, they'd give them to me back then. Um, and so by about 10, I was smoking regularly. And by the end of high school, I was a pack a day smoker. So it was very different in that way. Academically was also very different. We started off kind of similar, but ended up very different because I started off young in the gifted program. And by about fourth grade, the gifted program was starting to get challenging to me. And by the end of fifth grade, they decided to put me into the regular classes. And by the end of middle school, I was really struggling with academics and keeping up and just passing. I was really struggling with that. And the response I got from not all the teachers, but many of the teachers I dealt with was, I didn't pay attention. I fooled around too much. I talked in class. I didn't do the work, and I was lazy, and I was this and I was that. And I absorbed all of that. And by about halfway through my freshman year, I stopped trying. I became it. Because I learned that I could squeak by with most of the classes with D's and C's without trying all that hard. And I'd end up grounded. But if I tried really hard, I'd still have mostly C's and D's, and I'd still be grounded. So, like, why try? And so that was the attitude that I had with it. And most of my way through high school, I was like, I'm not going to college anyway. I'm not going to go. So I'm just done with school when I finished graduation, and I'm just done. About halfway through my senior year, I changed my mind and said I wanted to go to college. So I applied to a couple different schools, and I was accepted at Kutztown University and packed up, went there. But because I was a late acceptance, the dorms were already full. And so I didn't get to live on campus. I had off campus housing. So here I was, a freshman living off campus in an apartment with 5 others. And we had a clause in our lease that said we weren't allowed to have kegs. So we got around that. We just bought cases. But it was nonstop. There was always beer in the house. There was always drinking going on and whatnot. And I just thought of it as that's what life was. But a couple semesters later, I learned that they don't give diplomas for beer and football games. And so I kind of I would have been asked not to come back. I left in the middle of the semester because I knew that's what was going to happen, and I wanted to leave on my terms. So I left in the middle of the semester. I came home and I kind of futzed around with a couple jobs that were really not going to take me anywhere. And then my parents convinced me to try school again. And I went in as a non-matriculated student because I was able to get in without having the scores doing it this way. And I started at Villanova University. And I was majoring in business because that's what my parents told me I should do. And I absolutely hated business. I hated every aspect of it, and it just gave me more excuse to party because I hate this, so I can party more. And eventually, I had a conversation with my grandfather, and he asked me what I was doing at school, and I told him I'm majoring in business. And he said, do you like it? And I said, no, not really. I kind of hate it. And he said, I'm going to tell you what, you spend too much time at work to go to a job you hate. And I thought about that and decided he was right. And so I dropped out of school because that was, like kind of my answer for everything was to just, I'm just done. I'm just going to quit. Um, Again, I went back to kind of working some dead end part-time jobs, and I found my way into working with the fire company volunteer and began running on the ambulance and really enjoyed it. And they offered to send me to EMT school and they'd pay for it. So I took them up on their offer and I went to EMT school. And I did better in EMT school than I had done in any other academics because they didn't really care about the written exam as much. They cared whether or not I knew what I needed to do and could do the skill. And so, because I didn't have to do that written aspect of it, I excelled and I got through and embarked on a career in EMS. And I worked both paid transport and also 911 services. I worked in a little bit in Chester County, a little bit in Delaware County, Philadelphia, and it consumed me every aspect of my life. When I wasn't working, I was at the squad running volley, and when I wasn't running volley, I was still at the squad drinking with everybody. And that's what life became. And mind you, I'm not 21 yet. And roundabout here, I turned 21, and in the process of turning 21, I had gotten really, really inebriated and was supposed to go out with somebody, and they saw how intoxicated I was, and they went, we can't go bar hopping with you like this. We've got to get you into a state where you can party too. And that's when I was introduced to cocaine. And that was the end of everything. Alcohol was one of those things that, yes, I drank a lot and whatnot, but I could always put it down and not worry about it. And it wasn't the same with cocaine. From the moment I tried it took over, and I wanted more, but it was expensive, and so I had a hard time like managing that. And then down the road, somebody introduced me to crack cocaine, and then that took off even further, and that really took me through the loop. While I'm going through all this, I'm still working ambulance. I somehow was managing to, despite all of this stuff, all this substance use, whatnot in my personal life, I was still getting to work on time. I was never absent. I never called in. I was always there. I was the most reliable employee they had. And but outside of work, everything was a mess. And one day, my partner and I were on a call. It was a cardiac call, and the patient was heavy, and we called for a lift assist, and they couldn't get anybody to us in any kind of time that seemed like the patient was going to make it. So we made a decision that we were going to handle this ourselves and get the patient into the ambulance by ourselves. And in the process, we both got injured. And my injury ended up being a career-ending injury. I didn't know it at the time, but I went on leave. I went on for short-term disability, then long-term disability. And as I was going through physical therapy and had 2 surgeries on my knee, and the doctor told me, it's probably time for you to find a living where you're not lifting people for a living. And that was like somebody pulled my entire world out from under me. And I completely lost control of everything at that point. Prior to that, my relationship with substance was not a healthy one, and it just spun completely out of control, and I went full tilt on using everything. Throughout this, I ended up getting referred into the mental health system, and I had my first hospitalization because I was feeling suicidal, and it was a case of I really didn't know who I was. I had spent all of my childhood not knowing who I was, but like finding ways to get as close as possible to who I felt I was, but not quite there because I didn't even know the word transgender until I was 30. And I couldn't get good enough anymore. And I got suicidal. I ended up in the hospital. And that's where I was introduced to psychiatric medications, and I was put on a boatload of benzodiazepines, which just took things even further into the whole mess. The next 6 years were in and out of the hospital. It was like it had a revolving door in and out of the hospital. All in all, I had 42 hospitalizations. I'm not sure how I missed the rehab route, but I never set foot in a rehab. My recovery from substances began on a mental health unit, and it began not completely honest because I wasn't ready to be completely honest yet. The nurse came to me and said, "We're going to move you to the co-occurring unit because your drug test came back positive for cocaine." And I said, "Oh, no, 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 that's not me. You must have messed it up and switched me with somebody else. I don't do that stuff." Um, but in that same moment, I made a decision. I'm done. I didn't know what direction to go, how to proceed from there. Um, and I was connected at this point to the LGBT community. I had come out as being gay. I never connected with the word lesbian, and I didn't understand why until I figured out that I was really trans. Um, and now I understand why, because that was a word that was so associated with women, it just didn't work for me. Um, but I was kind of, figuring it all out. And but I was still on all these meds, all these psychiatric meds, all these benzodiazepines. Um, at some point, I came off of those as well, and it kind of boggles my mind because um, I did that actually against my doctor's advice. Um, the doctor that I was seeing at the time was telling me a lot of things that didn't work for me. Um, One of the things he was telling me was that I couldn't quit smoking because I would relapse if I quit smoking. And so that held me in that loop of using nicotine for another 10 years. Because every time I would try to quit, and I tried many times through that period, every time I would try to quit, when things would start to get hard and I would start to get that, like, I can't do this, I'm not sure if I can do this, I would hear his words, "You're going to relapse." And I would pick up the cigarettes again to prevent going back to the cocaine. And it happened multiple times. I did eventually reach the point where I was able to get them off nicotine as well. Um, I did that in 2013 as I was moving into my second peer support job. Um, and I figured that that was a good time because I was changing jobs and I didn't have my smoking habits at that job yet. And so it was a good time to stop. Um, I stopped in a different way, though. I couldn't do the cold turkey thing. I had already tried every smoking aid they had. The patch caused me to break out into hives. The sweetener that's in the gum and the lozenge I'm allergic to it. Chantix was wonderful for 4 days until it made me suicidal. Um, so I had tried everything and none of them were working. And everybody told me that this would never work. But I said, I'm going to, and I didn't even know the words harm reduction back then. I said, I'm going to do this my way. The ways that medicine has don't work for me, so I'm going to create my own way. And I started vaping, and moved from the cigarette to the vape over time. And then I decreased the concentration of the nicotine in the vape that I was using over time. and eventually got down to where I was on a zero nicotine. And at that point, I decided to quit. I moved from using the vape pen to I carried straws that were cut to about the length of a cigarette in my pocket. And so if I had the need to, I would, either chew on that or draw through that or whatever, to get myself through the day without picking something up. As I said, at that time, I didn't even know the words harm reduction, but I found a way to make that a part of my recovery path. Throughout all of this time, I had an on again, off again with 12 step. And my big thing was there were certain things that just didn't work for me in that program. And the response I got from people was, if you don't do this, you'll die. And I know that those words came from a place of love, and those words came from a place of trying to help. But those words almost made it not work for me. Thankfully, I am stubborn, I am bullheaded, and sometimes that is a good trait to have, because they told me you can't do this. And my reaction to that was, watch me. I ended up creating basically my own thing, my own pathway. Turns out that what I use is very similar to a combination of Smart Recovery and Recovery Dharma. So now I occasionally use both of those programs as a part of my recovery tools. And I am a firm believer in harm reduction. Harm reduction works. And there's a lot of myths and a lot of bad stigma toward harm reduction efforts out there. And most of it comes from a place of people not understanding what harm reduction actually does. So today I take part in harm reduction efforts. I also take part in trying to educate people from the medical community and from the behavioral health community on competency in transgender and LGBT services. If you go to all of the different treatment websites, you go to all of the, you go to Psychology Today to look for a therapist, every single one of those profiles says LGBT on it. And many of them don't know anything more than the letters. And it ends up causing issues, causing harm at times. Things are definitely headed in the right direction. There are definitely some programs out there today that are geared towards LGBT individuals, but there still isn't enough, and there unfortunately is still a lot that look like they are and really aren't. I didn't want to use the figure for this because it was from so long ago, and I know these numbers are no longer accurate. But in 2007, there was a study done of programs, and there was over 600 programs that were throughout the whole country, that were saying that they had LGBT services and that they were LGBT competent. And when they actually looked at those programs and broke down what they had, there was only 62 that actually met the mark. And that says something. It is more than just saying, hey, we welcome people who are LGBT. We do want that. But I strive to see a world where places mark themselves either LGBT friendly or LGBT competent. And the difference there is the LGBT friendly is going to be open to us being there, and the LGBT competent is actually going to be able to address the issues that we are working through because of our LGBT identity. And today, many of the facilities don't have that second aspect. And that is something that I directly, in that, going back to that hospital revolving door phase, that was something I directly experienced. I didn't even realize I didn't even know the word transgender yet. I was just beginning that part of my journey. And I was already being noticed as different by other people. And I had an instance in a psych ward that I was in where I had another person who was also a patient there was making me very uncomfortable. He was just staring at me, and I just felt very uncomfortable, and I began to feel threatened. Something just told me I wasn't safe. And I tried to talk to the staff about that, and I tried to say that I felt it was identity related and whatnot. And I was told that I was experiencing delusions and hallucinations, and that they wanted me to take this extra medication, which I refused. And so therefore I was a problem child. And an hour later, not an hour later, he was literally chasing me around the nurse's station screaming, "What are you?" Had they just listened, right? Had they just listened, had they just been open to the fact that I could sense something was there. Um, and so one of the things that I stress is that trauma informed approach, that believing that something is real, um, listening to everything a person has to say, and the training of the staff members needs to be all of the staff members. It's great if the doctor knows what they need to know about LGBT, what we deal with and whatnot. But if their staff don't have that knowledge, it ends up making the whole experience just as traumatic as if the doctor didn't know anything. This was not a substance use related visit, but it is something that could very well happen in a rehab too. I had gone to a medical doctor's office. It was my first time there, and I was giving my history. And I told the nurse who was taking my history that I was transgender and I was taking testosterone. And yeah, she wrote that down. And then as we went further along in my history, she made a comment about I'm probably not in a relationship, and I stopped her and I said, no, I am in a relationship. In fact, I'm married. And it was complete shock on her part that a transgender person could be married. And so these are the kinds of things that we navigate. Assessments, oftentimes gender, sexual orientation, it's all assumed by what a person looks like, by the presentation a person has, and questions don't get asked. And when those questions don't get asked, critical pieces of what is needed for treatment gets missed. And when we're talking about substance use treatment, that places us at higher risk for relapse when we leave, that places us at a higher risk of other complications. Part of the LGBT community revolves around, oftentimes many things are centered in the gay bars. And for an individual of the LGBT community to be told at all costs, avoid all those people, places, and things, don't be anywhere near it, you've now isolated that person from the core of the community. Is there a risk for attending things? Yeah, there's definitely risk. And it is definitely something that I wouldn't suggest in early recovery that somebody do, but it's something that maybe look at, how can you eventually safely do this? How can you be a part of the community, even in those events, but still remain safe in your recovery? We're already on the outside of much of society. There's already a big place where we often feel, just like Hope said, like we just don't fit in. And so the part of our society, the part of our community where we do fit in, where we do feel connected, it's important to not have an isolation from that. But I also urge the community, or my own community, to develop things that are outside of bars. Develop more things that are outside of bars. But in order to do that, we need a little gift from society to realize that we need to take some space once in a while. And that we can take some space and be on our own and not be a threat to anybody else if nobody is a threat to us. And recent events are what have me thinking about that. In April, there was a drag queen story hour at a library in Lancaster, and that event had to be canceled due to bomb threats. And a suspicious package identified by one of the bomb dogs. Because bomb dogs always go through children events, right? So that is our young people who are being told, no, you're not allowed to take up space here. And they're at that vulnerable age where the prevention is so important. And a big piece of prevention is just being able to exist and being able to say you're who you are. It's amazing the journey that I've been on. I've said a couple times that I didn't even know the word transgender until I was 30. I didn't begin my medical transition until I was in my 40s. That medical transition came as a direct result of being a parent. My daughter we had another name that she called me. She called me Baba instead of Dad, because I wasn't comfortable with Mom. And one day, nobody had told her to do this. She and I were alone, and she called me Daddy. And that was the thing that made it so that I couldn't turn back. I realized that this is who I was, and I needed to allow myself to be who I am. And today, I don't need any of those meds that I was taking before to be okay existing, to numb the fact that I didn't feel like me. I don't need any of them. All I need is my testosterone. But there are people who have an issue with insurance paying for my testosterone. And those same people had no problem with the insurance paying for 3 times as much dollar-wise in psychiatric medication to keep me numb so I didn't kill myself. These are the small things that we need to work on as a society, that we need to do to prevent future substance use disorder with our LGBT youth. From a very young age, they're hearing we're not supposed to exist. I read about sports teams and whatnot, and it's been shown that at age 8 is when on sports teams kids start hearing LGBT slurs, and many coaches don't do anything about it. And kids on both sides, whether they're not LGBT or they are LGBT, see the response: laughter, othering. So the kids that are LGBT shrink further into the darkness of the closet, and the kids who aren't develop these harmful attitudes about our existence. I'm also finishing a little bit early, but that's what I've got, and that's kind of my call to things. Thank you again very much.
Well, thank you, Don. Neither of you are off the hook. I've got lots of questions for you, but I really hope that the other folks who are with us tonight will also, please, whether you want to raise your hand using that little raised hand feature, or unmute and just ask your question, make a comment, anything like that. But I'll start with all of you and open it up, but then I have some things I wanted to follow up on also. While you're thinking of your questions, I will say I'm so grateful to you both, because not only, we have all these programs, or we have all these experts, and you both have some initials after your names. It is the personal story that is so really valuable to us, because it humanizes what we can hear epidemiology all day long about how this impacts folks, but it's really the personal story that makes it relatable and helps people to see the humanity behind these challenges. So I'm so grateful to every person in recovery, including the two of you. So thank you for that. So I'll go ahead and ask some questions. You both kind of touched on stigma, and I know that we've had conversations before when we talk about co-occurring disorders with mental health, behavioral health and substance use. And some people feel one's more stigmatized than the other, but I also think about the fact that you're talking about obviously the LGBTQIA plus community as well has so much stigma attached to it. And I remember something that Hope's colleague Katie said years ago. She said that I used to have so much shame around the fact that I identified as queer and that I had a substance use disorder, but today those identities are what make me most proud, for being a person in recovery and being a member of the queer community. And I just really appreciated that. And I think that we miss, until we really know this experience, we miss all the gifts that come with this journey, right? And I wonder if you can each take a moment to talk about, you did a beautiful job sharing your stories. What are you seeing with the folks you work with? Hope, you do so much prevention work. You're in front of a lot of very young people. And God, I'm so happy for them that they have you as a role model. Don talked about the challenge of not having role models, and here you are, doing that for these really fortunate young people who get to meet you. Can you talk about what you're seeing with young people? And then I'd like to ask Don to kind of talk with your coaching and all of the work that you're doing as well.
Yeah. So to give some more background, I work from kids from anywhere from middle school to college age students. And it's all around the world. It's not just anywhere. And a big reason I do it is really being representation. Like we were talking before we started, is not having role models growing up. I think it's really important, even when I am in Florida or in Texas, where I can't use my pronouns or I can't talk about, having a partner or anything that's really personal that's related to being queer. The kids know. And something that I'm seeing is they really appreciate when I'm there. I'm not an expert in LGBTQI. It's my personal experience that I have. My expertise is around prevention and harm reduction. But I always have multiple students or parents coming up to me and just thanking me for coming into a situation that might not be safe so that their kid can see me. And I think that is one of the most powerful things. And just letting them know that there is another side to this, even though it's really hard. So yeah.
Thanks.
So I've got a couple different areas where I'm working with kids, at the elementary school, and there it's focuses on being you, whatever you is, right? And learning how to manage and understand your own emotions, and realizing that some emotions might not feel good, but it doesn't make them bad emotions. Emotions are really information for us. And processing things like it's okay to feel angry. It's what we do with our anger that is potentially a problem. And actually having some real conversations about, on the prevention side of things, not handling emotions through whether it be substances or food or whatever, handling emotions, allowing emotions to process within, and those things be an external thing if you do them at all, right? And then where I'm doing therapy, that is from the tweens on up. And so some of them are openly, LGBT. I've got a few different trans kids that I'm working with. And for the most part, just being seen is a thing that they really embrace. It's pretty amazing knowing how much I didn't know what everything I felt meant when I was their age. Watching these kids embrace who they are, and tell the world who they are at 9, 10, 12, is just amazing. It's really, um, it makes me feel good that some of our youth feel empowered to do that. And I want to see more of our youth feel empowered to do that, because I think that is going to go a long way in the prevention side of things. Um, so much of all of what I did, I talked about I liked partying and all that, but the reality was I wanted to be numb. I didn't want to feel. Um, and so the reason I didn't want to feel is because I couldn't be me. And so to see them embracing being me, I think that's going to do a lot for prevention. And again, we have the same conversations around, if you're even going to play with this stuff, we don't want to handle emotions through it. We want to, do that, process that, and that's a totally separate thing. I tell people all the time, America has a really, really bad relationship with substances. From a very young age, we hear how you deserve a drink after a hard day, how it's the thing to do when everything went wrong. It's also the thing to do when you're celebrating and you're happy, right? So it's like all emotions go through substances. And, if it's not legal substances, it's, shunned, but if it's alcohol, oh, that's fine, right? And people make very big assumptions around it. Doing yard work last summer, and I was getting near the end, and one of the people from down the block that I didn't even know happened by walking his dog, and he could see I was almost done. He said, "Oh, it's almost Budweiser time." Why do you assume I'm having a beer at the end of this? Right? Because that is just illustrative of the relationship that we have as a country with substances. And the main difference between a person with substance use disorder and a person without substance use disorder is we both get in the same car, we both try the same thing, we both try driving down the same road, and we both misuse a little bit, use a little too much, get out of hand. And the person without substance use disorder hits the brakes and their car stops, and the person with substance use disorder hits the brakes and they're not there. Yeah, but we start out the same way. And the person with substance use disorder is doing everything society told them to do, and then when they lose control, society blames them. Yeah. Sorry, I took a tangent there, but
No, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. Don, when you were speaking earlier, you mentioned that there are, I forget how many programs you said, I claim to be LGBT competent, but there are actually only 62 treatment programs that actually are. So who's determining that those 62?
that was actually long ago, and that was a study that was done for SAMHSA that it was, and that's why I toyed around with even talking about the numbers, because that was 2007. So I know the numbers are different today. And I really searched to see if I could find more current numbers, and I was unable to. But what I do know for fact, because I watch as I'm helping people navigate getting into programs and whatnot, there's a lot of places out there that think they are, but then when you get there, they're not. Um, you know, little things like, yeah, we're LGBT affirming. Yes, we'll take that admission, and yes, we'll put that trans man on the men's unit. But we have semi-private rooms, and we're not sure what to do, so we're going to give him a private room, which inadvertently outs him to the entire unit because he's the only one that has a private room.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that Care and Treatment Center has some programs coming up actually around the corner. They've got they're thank goodness they're doing some really supportive things.
Yeah, there is some excellent work being done, and there has been vast improvements, but there's still more to do.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to put in the chat. This is it's a little confusing. I tried to get some clarity today, but I didn't get a response. There's a program coming up, but they have a breakthrough program that is kind of a generalized some trauma, some codependency, that kind of thing. But this one is specific for the LGBTQIA plus population.
I was
And
reading about that on their website today.
yeah, it's in August. It looks great. At the bottom of this page, though, it says this event has sold out online, but it also says to register, please contact the Breakthrough Admission Specialist. So I have a feeling that's a mistake, that sold out thing, because they asked me to let folks know about it on tonight's program. So
Yeah,
I would call that
I
number.
think they may, even if it is sold out, be planning to do a future, because it looked like it's going to be a permanent thing that's going to, be throughout the year, different sessions. So they may be just pre-signing people for the next one or something.
Great. Great. Well, I would love to hear from some of you folks, and you're welcome to put anything in the chat. I see a thumbs up. Thank you for that. But please go ahead and ask any questions, either using the chat, unmuting, raise your hand.
Hi.
Hi.
Can I just pop in here for a moment? I'm
Please.
sorry to raise my hand. I thank you very much, Don. Hope. Thank you. Nice meeting you, Kim. Thank you for tonight. I want to offer a little bit of hope. And what I mean by that is hope. When you mentioned Texas, I am from Houston, Texas. I live right downtown in the good old city of Houston. So let me tell you a little story here. What we're doing, and I'm very excited about this. Regarding the recovery programs, we have a place here called the Lambda Center. It's basically in the heart of Montrose neighborhood. Montrose is amazing. It is very, very, well, I would say it's very LGBTQ centered. And everything that they have in the neighborhood is supportive of that. Now, what the Lambda Center is doing is they literally have events and they open their front doors, and the entire neighborhood comes to join in on the events. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're part of the LGBTQ community, or you're just, you're the neighbor with 3 kids that they bring and their dogs, and everyone gets together. It's all a unity for sobriety and for the community. So that's another positive there for Houston, Texas. There's also, we have drag bingo every Thursday night. They have a huge, everything in Texas is big, as you know, but they have a huge, a huge event space that also promotes sobriety. They do have beer and wine, but they do, they really do support sobriety. And so we have all sorts of our drag queens coming in from all over the Houston area, calling out, bingo numbers. It's a laugh riot. And everyone, again, it's unity. It doesn't matter. People come and join in. It feels actually surreal. It's amazing how everyone is joining together in a city in Texas, but it is true. It really is. And I don't mean to disparage anyone who might be from Texas. We also have a group of people in the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce who I do work with, and they're amazing. The Chamber of Commerce has gotten so big here in Houston that they are now being sponsored by the likes of Exxon, other very, very large organizations. We have support from the mayor's office. So they're, of course, the political side of things, they are making sure that the LGBTQ chamber continues to grow with programs, with, job fairs, the whole bit. So I'm just seeing some hopeful, maybe I'm being a little pie in the sky right now, but I'm seeing a turnaround in a city that you wouldn't think, because of the stereotypes, Houston, Texas. But I'm really hopeful that this momentum continues. And I want to thank you again for sharing your stories tonight. It was pretty powerful. So thank you.
I really appreciate you sharing. I'm glad to hear there's some positive things happening in different parts of the country. I feel like we're in kind of a little bit of a, progressive area so that we may not feel quite as much. Then when the soon you start thinking that you get like slapped in the face with, Don, what you were describing before we jumped on tonight. So it's not always good news, but I am really grateful to hear some very good news about that. Thank you for that.
One of the things I take as a sign of hope is even in the most the areas that you hear about the most turmoil for the LGBT community, there are pockets of accepting places and whatnot. And so it's yeah, I'm one of the instructors for the recovery specialist curriculum. And when we are introducing the, what a recovery specialist does and all that, we have this little clip that we show from Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, yeah. And he talks about, whenever there's any kind of trouble, whenever there's any kind of turmoil, some tragedy or whatever, look for the people that are helping. And that's what gives you hope, right? And so that's what I'm trying to do as I navigate things, right? I'm looking for those little pockets of acceptance even in those areas, because I know that things, are going to go up and down. That if you look at the history of any group going through civil rights, if you look at the history, this mirrors other civil rights movements. And so as much pushback as there is from those that are not accepting, there's also those pockets of acceptance. And so that's what we need to turn toward and look for.
I was gonna add too, like with like my experience of like just traveling and things, is looking for like certain safety cues. I actually have a friend right now working on their dissertation with that, of like, what bathroom am I going to use when I'm in this location? Where am I going to get a person looking at me in the bathroom where I can just feel safe? And so like even thinking of like what I have to wear to feel safe. And like I will have students sometimes ask me like, well, what is it like living in Philly? And I'm like, well, sometimes there's certain parts of the city that I won't use the bathroom in. I know exactly which stores have gender neutral bathrooms in them, or I know the ones where I like have had some type of rapport with a person where like I know that they are going to be okay. Even to the extent when I was in an airport, where I had to ask a barista at Starbucks to come help me, because I would just needed someone to talk to me on the phone so that someone can maybe hear my voice and be like, oh, this person belongs in that bathroom. And that is a big part of it too, is like, how do we identify those safety cues for ourselves? And learning those are so like crucial, but also knowing if someone is going through that mental like Olympics of like, are they just trying to figure out how to be safe in this situation? And I've tried really hard to talk to students about that a lot, of like, how do we identify our friends when they're not doing okay, when it's something as simple as like, how do I get in line? Or can I go into this store? Is it going to be safe for me to be myself?
Right. Yeah. We have a program that's called the Search for Identity, where we talk about different kinds of populations who are getting labeled, right? So the athlete, the the gifted student, which you both have experience with, and all that sort of thing. So how parents often think that those are protective factors when they in fact and risk factors. Certainly the athletic community sees a lot of this where they've got a star athlete who has some infraction or something. Well, they want to keep this kid playing, right? So they maybe overlook this. And so there's a lot of looking the other way and enabling and that kind of thing that happens. And also that perfectionism. And we hear about, the study drugs, Adderall, things like that are really make a young person vulnerable when they're trying to be that perfect student. And certainly the LGBTQIA plus population is another that is obviously, as Hope talked about, most definitely at risk. And, I appreciated Hope that you said that when you were actually quite mature compared to a lot of the stories that we hear when you had your first beer, but nothing bad happened. And of course, you all know the expression, the worst thing that can happen to an alcoholic is nothing. And so, can you talk a little bit more about I'm just so, I don't know if impressed is the right word, that like you were 19 when you had your first kind of substance. Like, what was that? What do you attribute that delay of the onset of use that we're all rooting for? You know, I mean, obviously 25 is when the frontal lobe is fully developed and our risk factors go down. So 19 was obviously still a vulnerable time, but you weren't 13. You weren't 8 or however Dawn was when you got your first beer, right? 4. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, 4. What do you think, Hope?
Honestly, a lot of it was fear. I mean, I had always been like, growing up in Appalachia, on top of that with the Bible Belt, graduated from DARE. I learned that it was like bad. I didn't want to be a bad person. And then I also I had so much pressure from being the person in my family that could get out. Like, I'm the only person who has ever moved away from home. Um, and so I was like, oh, if I do this thing that I'm seeing all these other people doing, I'm going to get stuck here. I did not want to get stuck because I knew if I got stuck that I wouldn't live past 20 because there was just no way that I was going to be able to make it. Um, so it was really that, not really what we want like the delay used to be, because then then it did the opposite, because then nothing bad happened and it made me feel good because I got the dopamine release, and it made me feel like I could be more myself, when in actuality it ended up making me less like myself. So
Thanks for that. Yeah, I'll never forget one of our two talked about that when he was, he was trying to help people understand why a young person might be drawn to use substances. And imagine, I loved the way he described himself. He said, imagine a 13-year-old, all elbows and braces, going to my first dance. And I was not the cool kid, but some cool kids offered me a shot of vodka, and I did it. And like the cool kids are talking to me, I'm dancing, I'm talking to the pretty girl over there, like he said, all of a sudden, like, what's not to love? This just like made everything better, and it just makes, it's like, yeah, how does this not happen even more to young people? It's just, culturally so celebrated, validated, encouraged, and so, just thank goodness you're both doing so much work to help young people see that this can be problematic. And I know, Hope, that you kind of help people understand how programs like DARE aren't necessarily very effective, but you're saying like you had that fear piece, and we know that really we can't count on scaring kids to be effective. I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about that.
yeah, I mean, I think, just using fear is like really letting them down. Like, we're not teaching them. Like, I think empowering them with as much knowledge as possible, instead of like being like, don't do this, it's bad, or this is what's going to happen to you, and show you photos of like a wrecked car from like a DUI or something like that. Like, that's not effective. What we really is this, let's, approach prevention with harm reduction, and like, let's, maybe not like, be age appropriate with it, but let's talk to them. Like, what's happening in their brain? What is the cultural stuff that we've all been talking about? Like, if I say red Solo cup, even when I was in Hanoi, Vietnam, everyone knows what goes into a red Solo cup. It's not water, even though as a sober person, water does go into that cup. It has just been like so much into like what we see, how we like engage with stuff, celebrating, being stressed. And I feel like we are also in this period too with technology, this idea of fear around the technology, that we also like are like, that's another thing that I think as professionals, we're starting to like, it's a challenge. And that's a big trend I've had to talk on a lot too, is how do I get my child to take, breaks from screens, of like, is it similar to a substance? How are we going to treat this idea of being hooked on a screen? Like, it's doing a very similar thing in our brains. And also like, yeah, sorry, I'm going to like go on a lot of tangents if I keep talking.
No, I'm glad you brought up technology and social media because, it's kind of a friend or foe sort of thing, right? I think that it can be incredibly empowering to see yourself reflected in other communities. And there are certain social media platforms that you can follow people, feel validated, feel supported. And then you get the bashing and the shaming and, so it's such a mix. And my gosh, we know, I mean, I'm sure if you're all reading like Jonathan Haidt and all these people who are writing about the challenges with social media technology and access to, and it's such a young, tender age when kids are so vulnerable and they can see everything, on that device that's not really a phone. Let's face it. Not many people use it as a phone, especially people who are young. But it's just how can we moderate this and use it in a healthful way that's supportive without going down some really scary rabbit holes,
I also will always highly encourage, even as like adults, is really always constantly being better at media literacy. It is so hard to navigate technology right now with like what is real news or what is like fake. And I mean, I remember growing up like in the early aughts and tens when like, you were taught a lot of internet safety. Well, we're now seeing generations of like, students in middle school and high school where they never had that transition. It just completely exploded, and this idea of safety on the internet is very different. But we're also seeing, well, like, how do we differentiate which TikTok is actually giving me good advice on my eating habits or my sleeping habits? Like, how do we make sure that they know that? But also, like, as adults, how do we make sure we know it? Because it's very challenging. So I always just encourage, like, making sure we're always keeping up on that.
Absolutely. Thanks for
Excellent
that.
point on that. Excellent point on all that. I mean, Kim, that this is something that I've done a lot of, research recently on, and yeah, the social media and the gaming and all that. It's a double-edged sword because on one hand, it is a source of connection. It is a source of, connect. If you're not near a community that's like you can connect to a community that's like you with it. But it's also a source of the shaming. It's also a source of getting false dopamine rushes and the reactions and whatnot. It gives us that dopamine hit, and it can have the same effect as a substance on that reward center in the brain, and it can become just as addictive as a substance. And it is not yet named as an official disorder in the DSM, but it is being looked at as being included, and it is something that in all ages, not just the kids, but even the adults that I see that are coming in, that I see signs of. I'll say as I'm doing that assessment, what are your favorite things to do? And the first thing I hear is gaming, right? And then I say, okay, so what's your favorite game? And so then they have to go, well, like this one is this, and this one is this. This was, well, I think that right now it's this one. And then I'll start, well, how much gaming do you think you do? And I've done assessments on some kids, young kids that are 4 hours a day of gaming. That's a lot of gaming, right? But it's more than just the gaming because they're able to connect to others on there, which is for all ages both a neat thing and also very scary, right? Because you don't know who you're really connecting to. You don't know who's behind that username. You don't know if what they're telling you is accurate. And then, so assessing, well, are you actually connecting with people in the physical world, or are all your connections on the online world? And making sure you're calling it online and physical and not real and, and fantasy, basically, because that online connection becomes as real as the physical connection when they're in the midst of that. So it's fascinating and scary.
To navigate for a young person, for sure. Don, I appreciate you put in the chat the bathroom safety refuge bathrooms. I'd never heard of that. I'm going to be adding that to the resource page. That's awesome. Thanks for that. Well, we're at the end of our time.
And FYI, for allies, putting it on your phone and entering ones that you notice have the features that might make somebody comfortable is a way you can be an ally, right? Because somebody who's using that for safety then has more information. And so it doesn't have to be all like celebration and see me being an ally. It can be little things behind the scenes like that that really make a difference.
Oh, I love that suggestion. Thank you. Great thought. I appreciate it. Well, I cannot thank you both enough. This was wonderful. I really so appreciate your time and your transparency and all that you're doing to help so many folks out there. So thank you very much, Hope and Don. Thanks so much. And thank everybody for joining us. I check back on that follow-up page. Hopefully saw it on the chat, all the links that I shared. You can go to that LGBT page that we have to find the recording. If you'd like to share this, I hope you'll share this with others who would find it helpful. So again, Hope, Don, thank you all so very much.